Hi, this is John Linneball from John Linneball Tutoring, and this is AP US History Video 57, Lincoln and the Civil War. Here's my contact information if you would like to contact me. Let's get moving here. Introduction. Abraham Lincoln made a number of speeches, the best known of which was the 1863 Gettysburg Address, which generations of school children, maybe even you, definitely me, have had to memorize. Those speeches aimed to place the Civil War in a greater historic context and portray the abolition of slavery as the U.S. government's making good on the promises in the Declaration of Independence and other foundational principles found in what they call founding documents rather frequently. E pluribus unum. If I pronounce that wrong, I'm sorry, Latin scholars. Anyway, that means from many, one. Moreover, the Civil War, as well as Lincoln's recognition of the war's significance, is one of the most important steps in the process of the U.S. forming one nation from a collection of individual states and becoming a more modern nation. The Gettysburg Address ushers in a new age. The Battle of Gettysburg, 1863, was a significant pivotal point in the Civil War. Several months after the battle, President Lincoln traveled to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, to dedicate a military cemetery created there. Lincoln's address concisely described the Civil War as the United States' attempt to honor the democratic principles, such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all people in the U.S., not just people of a certain color or certain ethnicity or whatever, or certain religion, that was generally expressed in the U.S.'s founding documents. Lincoln referenced the Declaration of Independence, which was ratified 7 years ago, that is 87 years before 1863, before the Gettysburg Address. So, 87 years before 1863, when the Gettysburg Address was written and performed, given, I guess. Anyway, emphasizing the idea that all men are created equal. The idea was to place racial equality in context of the democratic aspirations of the Declaration of Independence and other, in quotes, founding documents from the United States, including the Constitution, except for that 3/5 compromise part. That was the part that, presumably, if they had left that out, the U.S. could have possibly gotten rid of slavery a lot quicker and could have avoided this whole problem with the Civil War and all of this. Lincoln believed the Civil War was a test to see if a nation conceived in liberty and based on equality could last. The speech emphasized the point that the people of the U.S., including Lincoln, could not dedicate or consecrate, kind of make holy, the graveyard. The sacrifice Union troops, living and dead, made was much more, it did far more, to make Gettysburg sacred than any speech could. Lincoln continued to rally the crowd to dedicate itself to victory in the Union cause, which would lead to true freedom and equality, or, in quotes, a new birth of freedom. Lincoln argued that only the achievement of this goal would truly honor the dead of Gettysburg. The Civil War's outcome, especially as interpreted by Lincoln, played a crucial role in the development of the United States as a modern nation. Lincoln's speeches and policies, enforced by the war's outcome, firmly established the idea that the states did not have the right to secede and that the U.S. was larger than the sum of its parts. Basically, the Union won, said, nope, you cannot secede. And yes, some of you out there are thinking, well, what about Texas? Texas has a constitutional right, or a right through its treaty when it was, when it agreed to join the U.S., that it has a right to secede. Possibly so. I will recognize a possible exception for Texas, but generally speaking, the result of the Civil War was to show that, yeah, the U.S. is not going to let other states, not going to let its own states, I should mean, secede to become a separate country or join a separate country. All right, let's move on. And here we see a nice little plaque where they call the Gettysburg Address Lincoln's Gettysburg Speech. If you zoom in on it, you can read it. And I just thought it was a nice little thing, so I thought I would include it here. One nation, undivided. After the Civil War, the U.S. was described as a single nation rather than as a confederacy of single states or one nation indivisible, to quote the Pledge of Allegiance. The Pledge of Allegiance actually wasn't written until 1892, but certainly the underlying ideas of one nation, indivisible, existed a long time before 1892. And if you would like more information about the pledge and its history, you can certainly go to www.ushistory.org/documents/pledge.htm. Historians such as Eric Foner write of the United States' shift from a union of states to a nation as a developmental stage similar to that of the Meiji Restoration of Japan in 1868 or the Risorgimento that created Italy from smaller states finishing in 1871. The U.S.'s unification was built around the idea that democracy, rather than explicitly ethnic ideas, should unite a nation of smaller states, provinces, city-states, whatever, into a nation. How the Union won the Civil War. I don't care whether you call it the Civil War or the war between the states. Either way, it was the Civil War or the war between the states, and the North won, or the Union won, whatever you want to call it. All right. The South, or the Confederacy, had military skill and motivation on its side early in the war. They had motivation because they were a new country, and they wanted to not only secede from the Union, they wanted to succeed at being a nation that would exist and live and endure. Unfortunately for them, the North eventually prevailed because of factors involved in a prolonged war of attrition. And even though the North didn't have very good generals compared to the South had Robert E. Lee, the North had a number of other generals that just weren't as good. Basically, the North eventually found effective military leadership and created efficacious war strategies. So they found generals who could get the job done, and these generals helped develop tactics, strategies, etc., that ensured that the job did get done, and that was the way the job was done. The North's ability to create abundant materiel relatively quickly was a huge factor in determining the outcome of the war. They could make more guns and bayonets and uniforms and whatever else they might need to send over there. So that helped determine the outcome of the war. The Union's decision to use, in quotes, total war as its strategy, attacking not only the Confederate troops but also its infrastructure and the environment, was also a decisive factor. That made this war a little bit different from previous wars in that most wars before that, wars of previous eras, really troops only attacked other troops. They didn't blow things up. They didn't destroy infrastructure. So the total war, we would see that again after the Civil War, but that was a relatively new idea back then. The Union and the CSA, the Confederate States of America, had strengths and weaknesses. The Union, as we already discussed, had materiel and personnel. They had that as a massive advantage. The Union population was about 22 million people. The South, the CSAs, was only 6 million, not counting slaves. The Union had a diverse population and diverse industries. It also had a pretty huge rail network. So it made it easy to create supplies and ship them to the battlefront in the South, and it made resupplying Union troops relatively easy. A disadvantage is many people didn't want to fight. You can take a look at my previous video, American history, basically, I'm sorry. Anyway, AP US History video 55. Draft riots at 7:04. What I'm talking about there is, okay, if you look at that video, go to 7 minutes and 4 seconds, and you'll see a discussion of the draft riots in New York City and the draft riots in Syracuse, New York, that showed that this war was not very popular on the home front, especially with people who were recent immigrants who felt it wasn't fair that they all of a sudden had to go and fight when they had just gotten to the United States. And people who were poor, working class, whatever, just felt like, well, wait a minute. Rich people can pay money not to serve in this war, but we have to go. Anyway, let's move on. The Confederacy, well, as I already discussed, they were fighting a defensive war. Such wars are generally easier to win. As I discussed, the people are motivated, they possess the local resources. If you're a farmer, you know exactly where your crops are. You're going to fight really hard because you don't want a foreign army taking over your farm. I think there was a movie called Red Dawn where the U.S. is invaded by Russia. This was in the 1980s when the Cold War was still going on. It was like, we live here, something like that. If I got that wrong, I'm sorry. But anyway, generally, any country that is being invaded is always going to have just a defensive advantage because the people who live there do not want to be invaded, do not want to be taken over, and they know the terrain. They know how things work there, whereas invading armies often do not. You can also ask the French about Napoleon versus the Russians and how Napoleon quickly became very sorry that he tried to invade Russia. But let's get back to this. Okay, so you want to think about the American Revolution. Who won? Well, obviously the Americans did rather than the British. Had a lot of help from the French there, but you could also look at the wars in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and who won those? Here's a hint. It wasn't the U.S. military. So you always want to remember that if you're defending, you always have an advantage over an army that has to invade you. The South also had and still has a rich military history. There's a tradition of service that bred and presumably still does breed great military leaders and lower-ranked soldiers and sailors. So that's what the South had going for it. How the war was fought. The Union's war strategy had 3 parts. 1. The Navy blockaded southern ports. Called the Anaconda Plan, the strategy was meant to strangle trade between the South and the rest of the world. Just like an anaconda is a big snake that will strangle you if you are its prey and it wants to eat you. 2. The Union also worked to control the Mississippi River to stop Confederate shipping along that route and to divide the South geographically. Divide and conquer. If you can literally divide the landmass that is a country, that's going to make it very hard for that country to defend itself against your war effort. And number 3, the third part of the strategy was for U.S. troops to attack the Confederate capital, Richmond, Virginia, en masse, leading to victory. So that was the tripartite or 3-part plan that the Union Army had. How the war was fought. Southern victories. Lincoln and many Northerners thought the war would be a quick, easy victory. The first Battle of Bull Run at Manassas, Virginia, proved that assumption false. Confederate troops beat advancing Union troops handily. Confederates dominated the Union Army in battle from the rest of 1861 to 1862. So the Confederate Army was just really, really dominating in 1861 and 1862. As the kids probably used to say, well, as the kids used to say, hey, did you dominate? Okay, anyway, I don't know. They probably don't say that anymore, but so what? Let's move on. How the war was fought. The tide turns. Lincoln changed the generals-in-chief chosen to command the Union Army several times until Ulysses S. Grant finally became the general who led the Union Army to victory. U.S. troops suffered defeats at the second battles of Bull Run, Fredericksburg, and others. The Battle of Antietam, in which the Union Army defended against a Confederate invasion, has been deemed as a Union victory, even though it was kind of more of a draw. I mean, they successfully defended against the invasion, but a more aggressive counterattack could have caused considerably more damage to the Confederates. But anyway, the defenders did defend their territory, so it counts as a victory in that sense. How the war was fought. Iron-clad ships. The early Civil War also led to the battle between two iron-clad warships, the Confederates' Merrimac and the Union's Monitor. It was a draw, but it was a start of a new era in naval warfare. That is, with instead of wooden ships, you actually had ships that were at least covered with iron. So that would, of course, be the predecessors of today's ships that are basically all made of iron or steel or metal. They're certainly not made with very much wood, if any. How the war was fought. Blockade. The Union Navy managed to blockade the Confederate States successfully. Some speedy Southern steamships who were nicknamed, or that were nicknamed, I should say, they're not people, they're things, that were nicknamed blockade runners, could evade Northern warships, but it was too expensive to ship cotton to foreign ports using these blockade runners. They're fast, so they had to be light, so they probably couldn't carry much cotton. So even though they could get through the blockades, they couldn't get enough cotton to make it worthwhile. How the war was fought. Blockade continued. The CSA tried a policy of blockades on Great Britain, trying to paralyze British textile mills by denying them the cotton that they would need to run, until such time that Britain recognized the legitimacy of the Confederate States of America and agreed to aid the Confederate States of America's war effort. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. And the reason it didn't happen is, well, probably because the South needed those cotton revenues more than Britain needed the cotton from the South, since the Confederate, the CSA was considerably smaller and had a smaller economy than the British economy. So, the British, bigger country, bigger economy, they could probably get cotton from other countries. And in addition, the U.S. blockade kept the South from selling cotton to other countries overseas. So they kind of shot themselves in the foot. And that's like, okay, we're not going to sell our cotton to Great Britain. Great Britain says, all right. And the U.S. says, well, that's fine. You're not going to be selling it to anyone else besides the British, so enjoy your surplus cotton. Hope you can figure out something to do with it. Anyway, the final nail in the coffin, so to speak, was that the U.S. negotiated with Great Britain to keep Great Britain out of the war unless and until it became obvious that the Confederate States of America would become an independent state with, all certainty. So the treaty basically said, all right, if it becomes obvious that the Confederate States of America is going to win the war, or at least they're going to keep their independence, fine. The U.S. isn't going to interfere with Great Britain's trade with the Confederate States of America because that's just becomes pointless at that point. But that didn't happen because the Union actually got pretty good at waging war. Other important victories. So, the Battle of Gettysburg was an important pivotal point during the war. It was the apex, or the high point, of the Confederate advances. After that, the CSA troops had to retreat. Another important battle was at Vicksburg, Mississippi in 1863. The Union Army gained control of the Mississippi River, splitting the Confederacy into two geographic areas, as was their goal. Their goal being the Union's goal, not the Confederacy's goal. The Confederacy isn't going to say, hey, why don't we let our enemy army split us in half? No. I meant it was the Union's goal. Anyway, the top picture here, this is the Navy attacking batteries, that is batteries of cannons, they're arrays of cannons. And so they're on the shore, and Union ships are attacking these Confederate batteries with the Union Navy and their own ships with their own cannons. And on the bottom here, we see General William Tecumseh Sherman's March to the Sea in 1864. This was a massive attack where the Union troops went from Atlanta to Charleston, South Carolina, which destroyed any chance the South had to negotiate a peace treaty, because once that was over and the Union troops had won that, they realized, yeah, it's all over for the South. There's really nothing they can do. So as a result, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to U.S. Grant, that is Ulysses S. Grant of the Union Army at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia in 1865. And again, this is a painting that's representing the March to the Sea. Again, it's also the idea of total war. This is, we are going to completely screw up, just disrupt the infrastructure. You're going to have to rebuild cities and all sorts of things. You are definitely going to wish you had not started this war. So that heralded in a new era in warfare, for better or for worse. Note on military history. The AP US history test doesn't test that much on military history other than the very broad strokes. Basically, they're going to be things that have larger implications for history. So if a battle isn't something that would be a turning point, that is where it went from one side winning to the other side winning, and that side would actually go on to victory, not that important, or it might be important for strategic, political, or diplomatic reasons. Don't worry too much about that battle. You won't be expected to know too much about specific strategies, fine details of battles, unless they're revolutionary new strategies like the Iron-Clad ships and the Monitor versus the Merrimack technologies, things like that. So if it's not, well, they found that if everybody walked in single file, they could save a little bit of time, and but unfortunately they didn't realize they had the wrong kind of boots. Probably not going to be as important. Certainly things that really only military tacticians or people who are really big into wargaming, they're not going to ask about that. They just want to see, Do you know where history changed? Do you know why this was important beyond just this war, etc.? Those are going to be the main things they test on. All right, so I hope that helped. And watching it. Did you find this video useful? Please like it and subscribe to my channel. Neither action costs you anything. You'll be alerted about my new videos. Why? It's really simple. YouTube doesn't let me share any ad revenue unless I have 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 hours, that's 240,000 minutes, of view time in a year. While many people are watching these videos, I don't have 4,000 hours of watch time in the last year. I do, however, have 1,000 subscribers, actually more than 1,000 subscribers at this time. So thank you so much to everyone who actually helped me out by subscribing. Ad money will help me make more of these videos. And speaking of ad money, if you've seen an ad during this video or my other videos, please know that I did not get any of the ad money, and I won't until I have the subscribers and view time that YouTube demands. For the same reasons, you are not only welcome but encouraged to share links to this video, put it in playlists, etc. I gladly read and respond to constructive criticism or suggestions for new videos that are also constructive. I reserve the right to delete comments such as troll posts or spam for obvious reasons. Nobody likes trollers and spam. You can hire me for tutoring. We can do it online through Zoom or some other similar internet platform, or we can meet in person. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, so if you're around there, it's pretty easy for me to come see you. I do travel to other cities sometimes, so you can always contact me and ask me if I'm going to be in your city, and that's another way that I might be able to meet with you in person. Thanks for watching, and my contact information follows. You can contact me on Facebook, facebook.com/Linneball Tutoring, all one word. Instagram, it's instagram.com/John.Linneball.tutoring. And the phone number, this is my cell phone, 415-623-4251. You can always call me or leave a text message. Email, you can always email me at john@johnlinneball.com. Website, you can reach me at johnlinneball.com or johnlinneballtutoring.com. They take you to the same website. And you can also find me at testpreparation.locals.com and at lbry.tv at John Linneball Tutoring. That's a nifty little site, lbry.tv. My actual postal mail address is John Linneball Tutoring at 1859 Powell Street, number 109, San Francisco, California, 94133. And finally, please note, this video is not a substitute for your classes, etc., or the text or anything else. This video is based on Barron's AP U.S. History Review Book, the 4th edition. Some of them it's the 5th edition. Anyway, or any other sources used in the video description and my general knowledge of U.S. history. While these videos should all help you do well on the AP U.S. history exam, I can't be responsible for what your teacher thinks is important and asks you about on his or her own tests, homework, etc. Please, please, please read your class texts, and please pay attention to what your teacher says in class, because that will help you do well on the tests and homework, etc., that are not the actual AP US History exam. All right, have a nice day.